All right, as promised, today's video on what's the harm in saying video games are harmful. We're going to go back to Little Leanna, right? Like I said, the neighborhood I grew up in was called Jane and Finch, known for really good jerk chicken and some social problems, some violence. The gangs ended up getting pushed off more outside the city, more into like Rexdale and Dixon and all that stuff. But there were some issues with Jane Finch and a lot of poverty, a lot of kids who didn't have a lot of uh, good adult role models in their lives, and two of the things that were real big there were video games and hip hop. And there was a collective of us that also there was a group of us that liked grunge, and we were weird in that neighborhood. Like hip hop, dance hall, reggae, that was the norm. It was amazing for me to go to work at a music channel and find out that dance hall was not a thing. Grunge was in like, I don't know, mainstream culture, white culture. But if you went in to where I grew up and started crapping on dancehall, like, yeah, there are issues with it. Yeah, a lot of the lyrics were homophobic. But you can't go in and dump on the stuff and expect a kid who's like angry and traumatized to listen to you. And this is why I found it so interesting. There's actually a name for the catalyst model of, early life experience mixed with genetics are better predictors of aggression than the media one consumes. There's some very compelling things about what trauma does, like, bless you, Momo, developmentally, when a woman is stressed out while she's carrying a baby, while she's pregnant. Bless you, Momo. That can possibly have lifelong impacts on things like cortisol levels and stuff like that in the kid. And there's a lot of that in those neighborhoods, right? So, I grew up some real good people, right? Really good people. Had challenges, but good people. But their entire lives, they were being told they were no good and the stuff they liked was no good. And I can't describe, it's one of those things you have to experience, what it's like to have your entire existence criminalized, right? To have, these big tall fences with, in some neighborhoods in the US, we didn't have this, but some neighborhoods in the US had like barbed wire, like when your schoolyard looks like a prison yard, like that does something. And every time you get on a bus, you're given the stink eye because they're making sure you pay your fare. And every time you go into a store, you're watched because they assume you're going to try to steal something. And seeing that, growing up in that pressure cooker, and then moving out of that neighborhood and being in a more affluent neighborhood where that isn't the presumption when a kid walks into a store, it's night and day. Like, it's a big difference. You can't go into a pressure cooker like that and start insulting the things that give those youth any sense of self-worth. And those, gangster rap lyrics and the dance hall lyrics, they were what we would consider problematic, but that's not the audience. I mean, I did a thing about dog whistles a few weeks ago that not everybody got, but this is an example of when you've grown up in like an upper class suburb, you hear like an Elephant Man or a Beanie Man track, and it's like, oh, that's awful. But when you're in these, I'll say, oppressed environments, it's like, well, he's being honest, and we can trust him because he's not hiding the bad thoughts. He's facing them. And if he can face them, if he can do this, if he can make good in face of the bad, then so can we. It sends completely different messages, completely different signals to different groups. And then, of course, there was video games, right? And, I mean, Mortal Kombat was big when I was a kid. There was a group of us play Crystal Castles. Metroid was a big social thing. Basically, it wasn't like now where you can have like multiple consoles. People couldn't afford that back then. So like one person had a Nintendo, one person had a Sega, or back in the day, like one person had like a Commodore 64, one person had a television, one person had an Atari, and you went to each other's houses and like sometimes brought the console over to somebody else's house and you all played together. You could rent games from like Blockbuster Video over the weekend and play them that way. You could even rent a system. The early PlayStation games I played were on a rented PlayStation. You could do that back then. Now, could you imagine the game companies like, that's stealing, that's piracy? No, back then it was called a rental. But, you know, those visceral experiences, I can't really explain the sense of worth being able to work through a video game gave. And it didn't matter if it was like an ultra-violent splatterfest like Resident Evil or something like Super Mario 3. Like, oh my God, I love Super Mario 3. I'm not sure what it was about that game, but that game was just magical to me. I think because he could fly. The Tanuki suit was a frog. It was the leaf that turned him into a raccoon that he flies. Like, that makes no sense. But that's okay. Leaf, raccoon, fly, sure. You know, the fact that there was a certain skill level required to beat those games and you had to work at it really gave me a sense of self-esteem because I did it. And there's something to be said for knowing something's achievable. And that's what video games at least gave me. You know, you start off Mortal Kombat, you get kind of beat up even on easy mode first. I mean, I first played it in a coin-op, and I'm like, I don't know how to do anything. I don't know how to do any of the moves. You had to learn the moves. You had to study the moves. Like, you got the little Nintendo, like, magazines, and they had all the codes and everything like that. It took work. But if you put in work, you got better. It was achievable, and it showed that it was possible. And that's the only thing I credit with getting out of that neighborhood with a shred of self-esteem, other than some really great teachers, because I don't know how else I did it. I can't explain it any other way. And I really believe that positive influence can be something that can allow youth workers and advocates and just people who care about young people to use. But you can't reach kids if you crap on the things they like. So if you go in there and try to take away their hip hop and try to take away their reggae and try to take away their heavy metal music or their video games, they're just going to shut you out. They're going to think you're an asshole. And that's what the dialogue around video games has done. When you do that to a young person, when you seem like you don't get it, kids don't trust you. Youth don't trust you. But man, you should see what happens to my friend. My friend's got a son. He's 11 now. He's just starting to get the beginning of the mustache. But you should see the change in him and his friends when, you know, they come downstairs. Oh, what were you doing? Playing video games? Oh, what were you playing? Mortal Kombat Armageddon. Oh! That was the last, like, massive Mortal Kombat, and you just see them, like, the hesitation drains away, and all of a sudden, I'm like, who's your main? And, Sub-Zero, and I'm like, you're playing as Sub-Zero as your main? That's a hard character. And, like, it just, all of a sudden, they don't just, first of all, you're finding out about them because you find out what they like, But they don't just tell you about the game. They start telling you about other things. Because you had a point where you didn't judge them, you validated them, you knew something about their experience that was the beginning of a conversation starter. We know this works. And when you're shaming video games, you don't get that in point. You don't get the point of commonality that you can use to build trust. And why would you throw that out? Why would you throw that away? It makes no sense to me that anybody would throw away that in with a young or even an older person. Like, let's face it, people need supports most of their life, but certainly in young adulthood. Like, man, trust me, if you don't really start feeling like a full person, like you don't really feel like an adult, at least I didn't until I was like 28, 30. Once people started telling me, I guess because I worked in entertainment, once people started telling me I was too old to do shit, I was too old to go on camera for shit, all of a sudden I felt like a grown-up, and it sucked for a little while, but then it felt like, okay, I'm a grown-up. I'm a grown-up. I can do grown-up things. I don't have to sit here and let people tell me how to do things now. I know how to do certain things. But, because we have that extended adolescence phenomenon now, especially with people because of student debt not hitting those milestones like buying a house or even a car or anything like that, investing, anything like that, people are hitting those milestones later. Things that build understanding, common interests, and things that build self-esteem are so important. And it is those little victories that are the start when someone is really beaten down by life. Being able to beat a video game, that might be what gets them through the week. And that's, again, why I'm very iffy about the whole gaming addiction thing, because to me, it's actually compulsive behavior that's either someone's coping mechanism or it's some sort of compulsive or avoidant behavior. And if you just take that away, that's bad news. But you do need to build on achievements, no matter how small. And for some people, when they're really depressed, the typical things of keep a journal of 3 things you're proud you did today to try to retrain the thinking. People feel really stupid going, oh, wow, I got out of bed today and I didn't want to, and I brushed my teeth today and I didn't yesterday, and I got dressed. Go me. That can make some people feel like a real loser. But, oh, I beat this game on hardcore mode, like highest difficulty. Well, that seems less like a loser, doesn't it, for a lot of people? And that can be the first few steps on the path back, or the path to better. Path to being happier, more content, having a firmer sense of self. And I really think that lack of firm sense of self is what's at the core of a lot of this stuff. I've been talking to people ever since, and it was Christopher Ferguson again that his Twitter feed gave me this realization, the idea that, some people are very attached to their gender identity in a way I'm just not. I'm a Leanna in my head. I don't see myself just in female characters. If I were to pick the video game character, most like my knee jerk would be Kratos, who's obviously not female. And it was a real eye-opener to me that some people feel very invested in their identity. And I see myself much more as an individual as opposed to any part of a group. And I tend to get along best with people who feel bless you, Momo, feel the same way. Relate to themselves in the same way. I personally think that's ideal for me. I can't say that it's ideal for other people, but I think the more you get to know yourself as an individual, the less these gender and sexuality and race and all that stuff, the less those mean. And I am not saying those are not important, because I saw growing up what a racialized experience looks like. I saw firsthand how entire groups of people, entire types of people, not so much teachers. The teachers are really good, but even school administrators, but certainly police, community leaders, store vendors, like people who worked in stores, how they treated me differently than my black friends and my brown friends and even my Asian friends at the time, because the shopkeepers were Asian, and so I guess, I don't know, they thought they saw them coming. The Asian kids were afraid to go in the store sometimes. But they're like, that guy's crazy, I'm not going in there. I did see a distinct difference in treatment, and this is like not knowing us, just first glance, just judging us based on what we look like. I did see the different treatment. And that is something I struggle with even to this day, because I don't have a strong sense of myself as female. I encounter, and this explains a lot about why I chose to do the sort of work I do, is that, I'll encounter a situation where I'm prejudged because I'm female. It used to happen all the times at game demos where they'd have a pink controller and, they'd go for it for me and I'd be like, don't you dare. Nowadays, I wouldn't care. But back then, because there were so few women working in games journalism, it's like, don't you assume that about me. Like, don't you assume I like pink just because I'm female. I friggin' hated pink back then. I've come to terms with pink for various reasons involving performance. Everybody should be in a situation where someone else dresses you as an adult. It's very good for you. You're wearing what you're told to wear. Don't argue. That's how I got over my hatred of pink. So I'm like, you know what? This doesn't look bad. When you're forced, when what people expect of you is not the same as who you actually are, or how you actually feel, or what your interests actually are, it does make you angry. And so I can totally understand, at least it makes me angry. I can totally understand why gamers take real offense at the idea that gamer equals harasser, or gamer equals misogynist, or gamer even equals white male. Because, what that does is, what if some black kid, we'll call them a gender non-conforming kid for now, black gender non-conforming kid, what if they really love games? And what if they want to make games? They certainly want to play games, want to make games. What does it say to them that, no, a gamer is a white man? The people who make games are white and Asian men. How do you think that makes them feel? Well, it's either going to make them feel like I don't belong there, or it's going to make them feel like I'm going to have to work way harder than anybody else to be thought of as just as good. And because game development is such a commitment to begin with, I think you can understand why people just find easier things to do with their lives. They might not be as content. They'll get through, but they might not be as happy, and will lose out on some really cool ideas from a more unique perspective just because people self-selected out of the entire industry because the hill just looked too daunting. And that is real. I saw it happen. Growing up, I saw people talk about, when you start thinking about what you want to do with your life, when you're in those types of neighborhoods, you are discouraged from things that don't seem realistic, right? Because the people trying to stop you from, just letting you survive to 18 is a big deal. But, don't be a statistic is what you hear. And so the fear is that if you take a something really ambitious and fail, well, unlike rich people, you're not coming back from that failure. You've got nothing. And so now, you're you're 25, 26 years old, you have no usable skills, you have no transferable skills because, oh, wow, you want to play video games for a living? It's not true, but that's what people think. But, well-meaning people are discouraging really passionate people from getting involved in communities, seeking it out as a career. I do think that hours are also a big issue, but that's a discussion for another time. Just because I see that, where I grew up, there were a lot of kids who were not just taking care of their younger brothers and sisters, they were taking care of their moms too. Moms were either disabled, they had mental health issues due to trauma. There were some kids that we'd go over to their house, and I shouldn't say kids, we were teenagers by this time, but like mom was in bed and we didn't think anything of it, that was just normal for them, but mom was in bed at 4:00 in the afternoon, and it just happened in so many houses that it wasn't until I was an adult, it's like, wow, that's a sign that somebody is very physically ill, profoundly traumatized, or both, but that was just normal growing up. And when mom's in bed at 4:00, well, the oldest kid is looking after the younger kids, and the younger kids have a lot more responsibilities around the house too. Those kids can't commit to the insane hours that was a real problem for me. My mother really pushed. My mom wasn't in bed at 4:00. She worked, but the expectations that you're home by this time and you're sitting with the family and eating dinner, all those things that people like, oh, this is great for your kids right now. It stifles the ambitions of someone who has to be in a lab of some kind. And hey, the commitment for this course is 60 hours a week. That's what they told us going into certain courses like computer science and architecture. The amount of class time was that. And so there's a lot of social factors behind self-selection out of an interest or hobby or a profession. But it all begins in childhood and adolescence when people who could be role models reject a kid's interests. And it's profoundly important for people who care about kids and care about, like, quote unquote, at-risk kids to not do that. To use a kid's interests as a conversation starter, as that little island, when you start the video game and there's only that little bit of the map that isn't unlocked when you first start. That's your point in with a kid, with a teenager. And you can build and build and build and build for that. Not even a teenager, like say a veteran with PTSD, they may not want to talk about their mental injury, their emotional injury all the time. They may want to talk about something else. So talk about Doom. These things, these humanizing conversations are extremely important because that allows people to feel like individuals instead of collections of identifiers. And in terms of a fully self-actualized, a fully individualized self, you need those things validated. Like, I have had to realize I cannot relate to someone who thinks like, I am this race, I am this sexual orientation, I am this gender identity, I am this gender. I don't think like that. Like, I hate those forms, every question feels like, this is reductive, I'm me. And I get you have to fill out the forms, you have to pick between boxes and whatever, but it doesn't wound me the way it wounds other people. And, in some cases, things like gender dysmorphia, that's real. And, I'm not talking about that kind of thing. I'm not saying that people should just get over that. That's, of course, not what I'm saying. But that's what I'm saying. Like, in order to understand other people's paths, you have to realize that people actually think differently than I might. And, like, for somebody with gender dysphoria, they have to make their outsides match their insides so they can connect to who they are as an individual, because that disconnect is getting in the way. And I can just relate to that because I used to feel like I was shitty at being a woman. And it wasn't that I didn't feel like a woman. I didn't feel like anything. All these things that women were supposed to be, that girls were supposed to be, I wasn't. I was weird. And the great thing about gaming communities is gaming communities are really okay with weird. If you like the games and you're not a dick, or if you are a dick but you're a really good player to an extent, like if your asshole to awesome ratio is like more awesome than asshole, then come on and play. And I really wish more communities like that, man, were like that. And I think that might be part of it, because gaming communities are so individualized. Like, we pick our online names, we pick our online avatars, we can be anyone we want to be when we're playing video games. I think that really does put us at odds with external cultures that are very invested in, you know, your school, your town, your state, your country, or all these markers, right? Like all these tribal markers. And I think that might be part of the reason that various groups want to push gaming into this very bad thing. I don't think that's all of it. It's a complex force of factors and group of factors, and I can talk more about that if you want. And this is where we're at now. For Feedback Friday, what points that I've gone over the last few days do you want me to expound upon? Because it went a lot of different ways, and these are big topics. I'm very interested to hear what spoke to you guys the most. So that's what we're going to do in terms of Feedback Friday this week. So if you like this kind of content, because I don't know what I'm going to call this video, help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK. Thanks for watching.